Greg Sanders, and I am very proud to be the music director here at All Souls Unitarian Church. And during COVID, I'm acting as our technical director. We want to welcome you to our service today. We're so glad to have you. Many of you already know how this all works, so I'll sort of keep it brief. You'll want to make sure you're muted. You'll also want to probably watch the service through speaker view. Though if you choose to do gallery view, you can see all of your friends and cohorts who are here. Today's presentation and service is about prayer for non-prayers. Reverend Joel Miller is leading us, and Emily Salinas is our worship associate. If you need anything in this time, please let us know and we'll be happy to help you. Enjoy the service. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Joel Miller. I'm the interim minister here at All Souls. So glad to welcome you on a beautiful morning. So glad to be with you. These opening words are from the Unitarian Universalist minister in Kitchener, Ontario, Canada, Reverend Jessica Rodella. Listen, listen to silence, listen to the wind, listen to the stars, listen to trees. Dance, dance to the beat of your neighbor's heart. Dance to the rhythm of your childhood dreams. Sing, sing, sing and hum a wordless song to the tune of your rushing blood. And pray. Pray with a fever that makes you sweat through February snow. Pray with a fervor that chills in July. Pray with a fervor that appreciates the sound of a child's voice, especially with us here in worship. Shout your prayer like a howl, till the sound of your soul touches clouds and haunts the moon. Come on, let us howl. Our hallelujahs, our pleases, our amazements, our wonder. Let us pray. Let us sing. Let us celebrate. Come now, let us worship together. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our All Souls virtual morning service. My name is Emily Salinas, and today I have the privilege to serve as your worship associate. All Souls is an inclusive community in which we celebrate the inherent worth and dignity of each person. Here, we are a community of open hearts and open minds, and we invite you to bring your full self and all of your lived experiences to this community. Our congregation is comprised of people with varying faith beliefs, but we are united by our covenant and by our belief that diversity is a strength that is richer than uniformity. Our covenant calls us to put love, our guiding principle, into action. In today's service, we will contemplate the many ways that Unitarians pray. And today, perhaps more than ever, we need to connect with each other and cultivate this sense of community. So later on in the service, we'll display a link to an online connection card. It's a way for you to let us know of any changes or concerns in your life. It's also, I'm sorry. It's also, you can also find different ways to participate in our congregation through your filling out of this card. So again, thank you for being here today and welcome again. And let us begin by lighting our chalice. Please join me in reciting our covenant as my daughter Elena Leal lights our chalice. Okay, and her dad. Let's do that.
Love.
I guess. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. This is our covenant. Good morning. As a child, my mother taught me to recite the Lord's Prayer each night before beginning my own personal conversation with God, during which I did as my mother taught me, by sharing anything that may have been weighing heavily on my heart, as well as my hopes and my wishes for the well-being of my loved ones. My mother grew up in the Nazarene church. She made good with my father's family by baptizing me in the Catholic Church, and eventually she found her way to the deaf ministry of St. Luke's United Methodist Church, where my sister and I spent the majority of our childhood Sundays. While she never had the opportunity to experience the Unitarian Church, I do believe that she believed in and lived her life according to our shared values as stated within our principles. She too was a lifelong learner, and while she didn't aim to indoctrinate others, she identified with the Methodist ideology of living your life in a way that allows you to put your faith forward through your character and your good works. Despite my upbringing, my relationship with prayer, at least prayer in the traditional sense, over the years has fluctuated. Like many teenagers, I had a rebellious streak, and I questioned some of the teachings I was receiving. And I even told my mother on a few occasions that I didn't think God was real. And this carried on, and as I entered into college and my mother's health continued to deteriorate, I became a sophomore in college, and by that time, my mom had not been able to work for nearly 4 years. And while we would often talk about God, rarely would she bring up the topic of her own health. But during a visit home that year over Christmas break, that's exactly what she did. She stated that she would want me to move on and to not be angry if she were to go on to heaven. And my reaction to this statement was an angry demand that she promised to prove God's existence to me before she went anywhere. And so I went back to school feeling confident, knowing that my mom would never break a promise to me. She never had before. And knowing, in a sense, that she would not be able to fulfill her word. However, the very next morning, a few days before her death, I received a phone call from my dad telling me that my mom had been admitted to the hospital. And a few hours before that phone call, I believed that my mother made good on her promise, and I got my proof of God. On that morning, I heard my mother's voice calling my name at 4 a.m. Although my dorm was nearly 3 hours north of where she was, I heard her calling my name. It was so clear and it was so strong that I thought she might have been outside my window. To the extent that I got out of bed, I put on my clothes, my shoes, and my coat, and I walked around my dorm in an icy cold January morning, calling to see if my mother was there. Once I realized she wasn't there, I went back in. I debated calling home, and then I thought, well, my dad has to go to work. Probably not, I tried to put it behind me. I couldn't go back to sleep. But once the cafeteria opened, I went to breakfast. And when I returned, there was a message on my answering machine. The times have really changed. Yes, I still had an answering machine in 2002, but it was from my dad. And he had described to me how he had woken up to the sound of my mom crying out my name earlier that morning around 4 a.m. And that is what I heard. It sounded as though she were crying out my name, Emmy. It felt as if her calling my name was something of a plea from her to God. And for some time, I used to think it sounded like her begging for the chance to fulfill her last promise to her stubborn daughter. However, similar to that of prayer, my understanding and personal interpretation of God has also varied and evolved over the years. Nonetheless, the memory of this moment has always served to remind me of the powerful bonds that can exist between us, bonds of love that I believe can transcend our current understandings of all that we believe is possible. And therefore, although the practice looks different from when I was a child, I still pray on a daily basis, sometimes silently and sometimes aloud. Like my mom, I've shared this practice of prayer with my girls in the hopes that it could bring them a sense of comfort and peace when they inevitably find themselves in one of life's difficult situations. While there are many forms of prayer, for me, I consider it to be my daily practice of communicating with the universe and asking it to look after the ones that I love. It is a gift and a moment that I give to myself daily to reflect, to be fully present, and to try to reclaim some peace. My hope for all of us is that we all find a practice where we can also learn to reclaim some of our peace and strive and find a place to work towards living in our values. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. That was a wonderful member reflection that made me very happy. And today you're going to also hear Reverend Joel talk a little bit more about an important skill for UUs to have. He's going to talk about praying. And maybe you've heard about praying before, but possibly it's a new idea. A lot of people picture it looking like this. And a lot of UUs think of it as something that other religions do. But prayer can and should be one tool in your theology toolbox. Because the thing about tools is you may not need them every day, but it really stinks to need a tool and not have it. So, what does it mean to pray? I'm going to give you a very UU answer. It depends. Sometimes praying means having a conversation in your mind and heart or aloud using your voice. It can happen in a church or outside, in your home or in a car, anywhere really. For people who believe in a higher power, a creator, prayer might be something you send out. It might be a way of speaking to your higher power to ask for help or advice. But prayer can also be a way of looking inward. You might reflect on what your soul, your best self, is telling you. Prayer can also be something physical we do. Some people pray by meditating or using prayer beads like the ones we made in Spirit Play last year. People pray by walking along the lines of a labyrinth or even dancing. In fact, you might have noticed this picture frame on the wall behind me before. Let me show you what this is. This is a painting my grandpa made after he returned from being a soldier in World War II. I have often wondered if painting flowers was a form of prayer for him after doing something so dangerous and scary. And looking at this painting is sometimes a form of prayer for me because it reminds me that people can go through hard things and still see beauty in the world. And sometimes people also pray by helping. Remember the Transcendentalists? We talked about them 2 Sundays ago. Though they didn't start out this way, they eventually came to realize that their souls, in order to grow to their best and most beautiful, had to consider everyone else's souls as part of the same ecosystem. They had to look for places where that ecosystem was out of balance and see what they could do to help. So sometimes praying means delivering a grace meal, donating food to a tiny free food pantry or food bank, helping at a community garden, speaking up when someone is being treated unfairly, working on stuff that might not be broken for you, but is broken for someone else, working for a better future for people who aren't even born yet. And you might not think of that as praying, but just as some people who pray with their voices or in their hearts sometimes feel like they get an answer, people who pray with their bodies get an answer too, because the world becomes a little bit better, because they know someone is a little bit happier, because they know they did what they could do. Science has proven that all of these kinds of prayers, the conversation kind and the doing things kind, are good for our minds and our bodies, not just our souls. So when you think of prayer, remember that it's one of the tools in your very own UU toolbox. Thank you.
Good morning, All Souls. This morning, a particular joy I'd like to introduce to you is a very personal one. As many of you know, I am pretty involved in public art in Indianapolis, and this week was awarded a grant to do a very large mural in the Hawville Library as part of a racial justice initiative. Additionally, I am so happy that you all are able to celebrate with me. Another joy I'd like to bring up is Tom Seibert's announcement in the Joys and Concerns section of your order of service. He thanks all of us for the kind words during his recovery. And I'm especially pleased to be sharing mostly joys this morning. Peace be with you as we continue with our service this morning.
This poem is entitled Disciplines. If there is a prayer, there is a mother kneeling. This poem was written by Dawn Lundy Martin. She is a professor at the University of Pittsburgh. If there is a prayer, there is a mother kneeling, hands folded to a private sign. We recognize it if there is a mother kneeling, hands attent. She is praying, or she's crying, or she's crying and praying at the same time. Although it is recognized, the signals of it, it is private. And no one knows, perhaps not even the mother. No one knows the content of the prayer, nor perhaps its object. If there is a mother praying, she is on her knees over some object, as one does not often pray in the middle of a room. One prays at the window or over the bed, the head bent slightly up or down, the eyes open, closed. This poem is a prayer for prayers, you know, a wanting something equal to a prayer, even though I am not a mother. So if you were to have Googled different kinds of prayers after seeing the title for this service this morning, you might find all kinds of definitions of prayer, or perhaps the 4 or 5, the 6, the 7, 8 kinds of prayer. And there's all sorts of directions and assertions about what prayer should be or not be. I'm not here to tell you what it should or should not be. But I do see something that many Unitarian Universalists see in common about prayer. I'll start with my own views. For me, prayer is a connection with everything that is and with what is holy, with the sacred. Well, perhaps I should be more direct about what I mean. I'm a theist, so I feel a connection with something I call God. So sometimes my prayers are a connection, a conversation, really, with God. I'm also not a theist. All right, I have to explain that here just very briefly. So I wake up in the morning, and almost every morning, I have an argument with myself. The part of me that's not a theist, I call him a humanist, which is what I grew up as a Unitarian Universalist. The humanist in me says to the theist, "You still doing the God thing?" The theist laughs and says, "Yeah." The humanist shakes his head. There's something about that humanist in me. Even that non-theist finds prayer meaningful. Now, I'm too much a humanist. I'm too much a person who loves to look at the world around me to believe that prayer is a kind of wishful thinking. Prayer is I can make prayer and get things that I want because I just think hard enough and beautifully enough. I don't believe that. I don't see that happening. Even the theist in me doesn't believe that the conversations I'm having with God or goddess or the holy, whatever I'm calling that in any given day, it's not an old guy with a beard throwing lightning bolts. I'm with the mystics of old. I don't think describing the holy is useful. I think it's better to describe how I connect with the holy. And that's a big part of what prayer is for me, whether I'm believing in God or not. Prayer is a kind of conversation. As a non-theist, it works. As a theist, it works. As a science-loving, non-theistic humanist, prayer is this conversation with everything, everyone around me. Maybe I need to have a conversation with the universe. Maybe I'm having a kind of lover's quarrel with it. Like, really, what's going on here? Sometimes it's with the people I love. Sometimes it's with the natural world around me. In a moment like this, I feel like I'm praying with you, among you. I got this idea about prayer from the Universalist side of our tradition. I grew up with a covenant very much like the one that we shared this morning together as we lit our chalice. In the covenant I grew up with, we would say, service is our prayer. Now, mind you, most of the people who I grew up with were humanists. They didn't believe in a god or godlets or goddesses or a pantheon. They found higher meaning in community, in the natural world, in art, in love, in service. And still they said, service is our prayer. A big effect on me. Although I have to admit, I didn't think much of it as a kid. Nobody actually seemed to do any praying in the church in Ohio where I grew up. In fact, most of the prayers I saw were one of two kinds. There were the prayers that my middle school principal did. Every assembly we had in my middle school, the principal would pray, even though by then it was obviously not legal for him to do it. Actually, when he found out I was a Unitarian Universalist, he stopped doing it. Such power, frightening for a middle school kid. The other kind of praying I saw involved petitionary prayers. People asking for things. Usually it was at a sports game, two coaches praying to win. I had a very snarky opinion of such prayers, especially when I saw, back in those days, you could watch the television and some evangelical or preachers would have a program on and they'd be praying to heal people, these kind of petitionary prayers. And I just didn't have much patience for those. In fact, I was a little snarky about it. I would sing sometimes with my friends that song Janis Joplin would sing in a kind of gravelly voice. Oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes Benz? I don't think it was helpful to be that irreverent about other people's praying, but. And then I encountered as a young adult prayer in a way that I did not expect. I had a very hard time. I was a young adult. I was out of college. I'd lost love. Wasn't sure where I wanted to live or what I wanted to be doing with my life. And it all came together on one night. I went for a walk. I was walking in a neighborhood on streets. My ancestors had lived in this neighborhood and worked farms on what became streets and a neighborhood for 150 years. A place I knew well. And I walked these streets, just trying to make sense. Who was I? What did I want to be? I stopped on a street corner with a small park. And in a moment of confusion and longing and frustration, I said, what should I do? Threw my hands up. What should I do? And I got an answer. Live. Now, it's important that the way I got this answer was especially striking to me, and still is. This little park, the trees, the benches, the sky behind it. There was a presence that came up into it. Later, when I went to theological school, I was studying the Jewish scriptures. And there is this one story in Isaiah that talks about the mountains rise up in song, the trees clap their hands. Strange images. But I looked back on that experience, the trees, the presence, the benches, all in this presence, and says to me, live, live. I put my hands in my screen just now. I mean, it was pretty intense. And mind you, at this point, I'm very much not a theist. And I thought, what just happened? I kind of looked around hoping that somebody else had seen it, but I'm alone on the street at 2 a.m. There was nobody else around. And I got to thinking, was I just drinking? I'm an alcoholic and I was then, but ironically, I hadn't been drinking at that point. I got an answer. And I thought, that answer is pretty good. Live. I think I'm going to do that. And I thought, but I'm hearing things. And then the humanist in me thought, you know what? Maybe that's just endorphins, some brain chemicals running around in my head. Doesn't matter. It's a good answer. I'm going to go with that. It was a mystical experience. I had more since then. Part of what led me to become a theist. It was a very reluctant journey for me. I have these experiences. The humanist in me asks, are you still into that God thing? And the theist in me says, yeah. I have these competing truths. Two truths in me. They live together in a kind of peaceful, workable coexistence. I don't have to explain it. I can't. I never will, I don't think, at this point. Both parts of me, though, like we do in our covenant here at All Souls, we seek the truth in love. As I studied for ministry some years later after that experience, I discovered there are many kinds of prayer, and that perhaps what had happened in that moment, that I threw up my hands and asked, what should I do? That I had been, in a way, praying. I discovered later there's a writer of books, Anne Lamott. She writes about 4 kinds of prayers. She calls them please, thanks, oops, and wow. And I like those 4 kinds of prayers. Those 4 work for me. There are those petitionary prayers like, what should I do? That arise, just come out of my soul. What should I do? I'm not looking for a Mercedes-Benz. It just comes out of me. I wasn't even looking to pray. I've had these prayers of wow. Actually, there was a kind of prayer of wow after that experience when I got that answer, live, like, wow. I don't know what just happened, but I'll take the answer. I've learned since becoming sober that prayers of thanks can be very useful. It's a great way to start a day. It's a great way to remember how beautiful this life is, even in the most difficult of moments. And prayers of oops, also good ones to practice. You know, though, that before I started theological school, even in theological school, I wasn't thinking very much of prayer. I was skeptical. And then I became a parent, a father. And then I had a day when I was holding my sick little boy in my arms. And out of my mouth came, please take care of my baby. Petitionary prayer, and I wasn't thinking about it. Professor Martin's poem about prayer being a mother kneeling. Prayer is also a father kneeling. That opened me to prayer, that moment. It opened me to a conversation with something greater than myself. And it opened me to these 4 kinds of prayer. Prayer of oops, for example, when I am forgetting to practice prayers of gratitude, when I am angry and thinking and wishing ill of others, when I am resentful, or I find myself stuck in my own anger. Prayers of oops can be helpful for me. Prayers of oops can be helpful when I have harmed others. A reminder of myself of how I want prayer to be a conversation, a connection. There's this 20th century theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr. He had some advice on prayer. And after thinking about it for some years, I found it helpful. Helpful for me, both in my theistic and non-theistic approaches to spirituality, perhaps helpful to anybody who's praying. Niebuhr said, prayer does not change things. Prayer changes people. People change things. Niebuhr writes, prayer is not hearing voices. Prayer is acquiring a voice. And mostly I agree with him, especially the part about acquiring a voice. But I confess, as I have just now to you in my story, that sometimes I do hear voices back. For one who does not pray, a non-prayer, it might seem that simple meditation would be enough to practice gratitude, to seek forgiveness, to embrace wonder. But what distinguishes prayer for me is that prayer is acquiring a voice, a way of connecting. I'm not saying, I think meditation is a very good thing, and I meditate. But prayer is a way to listen and then to be heard. It's a way, perhaps even, to live our lives. This is why I recommend prayer to non-prayers, prayer to those who do not believe in God or goddesses or pantheons, perhaps not even higher powers. I'm not trying to convince you of anything here, but share with you something that's been powerful for me, and I've seen be powerful others. And I have seen that atheists can pray, and it's been useful, and they're still atheists. It doesn't change anything about what they believe. It gives even atheists a voice to the depths of their being and their longings. And I go back to that old universalist saying, service is our prayer. And that has come to shape the meaning of my spiritual life. Prayer becomes more than just communication with my words. It becomes the language of my living. I want my prayers to be everything I do. I want my prayers to be the way I cook, the way I drive, the way I care for others, the way I write a sermon, the way I visit a friend. Service is our prayer. What we say with our lives, how our souls speak through our deeds. I got a great email this morning. A member of the congregation said, yeah, I've heard that some Unitarian Universalists like to begin their prayers with, to whom it may concern. I always found that amusing. And I have had more than a couple of conservative theologians say to me, oh yes, you Unitarians, to whom it may concern, begin your prayers. But think about it. There's a reverent way to do that, and there's an irreverent way to do that. An irreverent way to say it would be, it doesn't matter how our prayers are addressed. But I think especially our atheists are perhaps being the most faithfully reverent people there are, by committing their lives with a prayer that begins, to whom it may concern, because our prayers concern the way we live and how our prayers affect others. I just call atheists reverent. Well, and I am known as the Reverend Joel Miller. It's a term that distinguishes my calling to minister to all of our ministries. Reverence, it's a kind of respect. Both of these words have an important meaning. To respect means to see again. To respect someone is to see them more than once, not just at a passing glance, but to see them and look again and see them and understand their truth, and then become reverent. To understand again truth. The second part of reverent comes from truth, the meaning of truth in the Old Latin. Truth again, to know the truth again. Reverence is to seek the truth with care, with respect. It's an honor to hold a title like the Reverend. And it seems important to me that if we're going to seek the truth in love, we have to see it with respect, to look carefully, to listen to each other deeply, and to understand that our truths sometimes are different and can't be explained in their difference. But what we can do is seek the truth in love. And perhaps even service can be our prayer with, through, and for one another. So that wow prayer is a good example of reverence. A colleague of mine, Colleen McDonald, writes about her experience of reverence. She writes, "I will never forget my first sight of the Grand Canyon. Awestruck, I burst into tears, became speechless. I couldn't get enough of watching the canyon go through its transformations of color and shadow as light shifted through the day. And I started observing other people stepping up to the railing along the canyon, stepping up for the first time. One woman peered out for just a moment from the railing, then turned on her heel and declared, 'Okay, I've seen that,' and headed back to her car. And author Paul Woodruff defines reverence as the well-developed capacity to have feelings of awe, to respect, and a sense of shame when these are the right feelings to have. I would disagree with him about the shame, but yes, respect, to allow awe to overcome us, to allow the prayers of longing, of wanting to arise unbidden out of us, to take advantage of the prayers of oops, and to practice the prayers of thank you. Woodruff reminds us that reverence is about a sense of perspective. Because if we're truly praying, we are truly not alone. We're in communication with others, with something. We're called outside of ourselves. We cannot help then but see that there are others who are experiencing pleasure or pain, they're suffering, have power or have no power at all. Their truths, their lives become important to us. This is why we still honor a Unitarian Universalist minister whose personal theology is atheism, honor her or them or him with the title Reverend, the Reverend. It's not about theism. In fact, I've talked about reverence for the past, 2 or 3 minutes. Never once did I have to mention a higher power or a god or a goddess or godlets. Reverence is a way of living our lives and calling each other to live our lives. Reverence is not the exclusive work of the clergy. It's for all of us. Irreverence is thinking there's only one truth. We're not looking at the beauty of the world around us, or forgetting to allow wonder to overtake us, to seek forgiveness when we've caused harm, to give thanks. Reverence is an experience that can defy our wanting to ignore it too. Those moments with a beautiful sunset and we just stop, or we're holding a newborn baby. I find it impossible not to be reverent in a moment like that. Walk and suddenly encounter a beautiful painting, or a beautiful day, a great thunderstorm. And then reverence reminds us that our lives can indeed be languages of love, lived words that come alive for our hands, our smiles, our care. And it teaches us how to care too, if we are being reverent, if our prayers are reverent. Perhaps the best example of that is when we go to help others, is listening to them deeply about the care that they want and need. It's rather irreverent to go to help a neighbor who's in trouble because their house is on fire but we thought the best thing to do was bring marshmallows instead of water. Prayer is giving voice to the reverence in our souls. Prayer is reconnecting with the beautiful world that's around us. Prayer for non-prayers is simply giving voice to the deepest reverence, deepest truths that live in our souls. Prayer is giving our lives a way to speak, to thank you, oops, please, and wow. So I want to offer you a prayer. Back and find that slide. There we go. Pray with me for a moment. How should a secular humanist pray? Because to what or whom? How is that meaningful? What is a prayer? I've heard more than a few atheists cry out in despair and frustration in a moment, "Oh God." Not for a moment do I believe that they suddenly become theists. I had moments like that myself. Moments when I was an atheist and heard, "Oh God," come out of my mouth. Oh God, oh God, I just said God, oh God. Truly, all that was coming out of my heart and my mouth was prayers, longings, awe, frustration. Listen to denial of my truth. Just reverence. A big sigh. I think, oh God, for an atheist is just a big sigh, an expression of desire. One time I heard a Unitarian Universalist who had started a Unitarian Universalist church, a man who was a devout atheist, but a faithful lover of the world and of justice. And he asked one day at a board meeting, because he was serving on the board, he said, "I'm an atheist. What am I doing here? I started a church." God. And then he laughed. We all laughed. There it is, desire. There it is again, our complicated, funny hopes, our longings, our awe. Humanists know the best science is reviewed by peers. Peers know that when our answers fall short, our friends remind us gently. Our best spirits, our best selves are reviewed by our friends. Remind us that how we live them, how we speak them is everything. And here we are on Zoom, worshiping together. Some of us are Christians who know joy when our secular humanist friends have found prayers that are deeply meaningful. And they're secular humanists and proud of it, and that's who they are. Here we are when our secular humanists see their Christian friends transported, and there's Jesus on Easter come alive again, and it gives them a sense of joy. Here we are, lovers of the earth, Buddhists seeking mindfulness, Jews and Muslims seeking peace for the world. And some of us don't know what to call ourselves, and we really aren't worried about that at all. Here we are. Many of us Unitarian Universalists, but maybe some of us visitors, and we're not Unitarian Universalists, don't have to be. Here we are praying. sharing our hopes, sharing our longings, our foibles, our awe. Atheists can pray. An atheist wants to. And I have to say, in this prayer, I have never seen a greater faith than an atheist who prays, a mystic who dreams with desire and hope for a world of justice and love. Let all our prayers join into one for the world that is possible. Amen. So be it. Blessed be.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life a shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Good morning again. Good morning again, everyone. If you look at the chat, you will see a link to our weekly online connection card. This card is available to you so that you can follow up with All Souls if you're a first or second time visitor and give us a bit more information about yourself. As a long-term member, you can also look at many of the things that we're offering, many of the different kinds of programming that are coming up, and express interest in them so that we can follow up with you and make sure that we're looping you in where you need to be looped in. And it's also a space where you can say, I would appreciate being contacted for some lay pastoral or pastoral care. I have some virtual programming ideas that I don't see now, but that I would like to see, anything like that. One thing I would particularly like to highlight is that our Soul Matters small group, which this month is pursuing the theme of how we live into the idea of beloved community, is meeting at 12:30 today. That's not something you need to have ever attended before in order to attend. There's no homework that you need to do before you show up. You can just come. You're very much invited. Another thing I just want to mention briefly that's not on here is that our makeup date for our youth hike that was canceled due to weather is today at noon at Fort Harrison at our usual location. I hope that you'll take a moment now to look this over, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Joel, for those words today. I feel especially moved, so thank you. Every week at All Souls, we share the plate offering with an organization that shares and advances our values. This morning, we're sharing our collection to provide additional funding for the Freedom School, which is to be restarted this summer at All Souls. And so, as many of you may recall, the Freedom School at All Souls, in partnership with the Children's Defense Fund, had been offered several years prior to last year's onset of the coronavirus pandemic. It is critically important, given these circumstances, that we really continue this effort in 2021. So thank you for your generosity in supporting the mission of All Souls and the Freedom School.
In a world where everything is connected to everything, let our prayers be lived to keep us connected beautifully, to give us courage when we need it, and to remind the world that it is possible to live with joy, to live with compassion, to live in peace.